When people see an RC-135 rivet joint, they often struggle to place it. It looks like a large aircraft. It takes off from familiar runways. It flies predictable routes at predictable speeds. But unlike fighters or bombers, it never appears to do anything. There is no visible action, no release, no moment of arrival, and so a quiet assumption forms, almost automatically. If nothing is happening, then whatever this aircraft is doing must not be urgent. If no strike follows, if no escalation appears, if the world looks unchanged, then perhaps this flight was optional, routine, or even unnecessary. That assumption feels reasonable. It fits how most people understand action and value. Things matter when they cause visible change. They matter when something happens afterward. And when nothing happens, we instinctively downgrade the importance of what came before. The RC-135 challenges that instinct, not by contradicting it directly, but by continuing to fly anyway. The rivet joint is most visible when the world looks quiet. No missiles in the air, no headlines announcing a new phase, no clear signal that something has crossed the line. And yet, this aircraft keeps returning to the same regions, circling the same edges, occupying the same airspace day after day. From the outside, it appears to be waiting, but waiting, in most people's minds, is not work. Waiting is what happens before something important begins, or after it ends. It is not usually treated as the important part itself. So when observers see an RC-135 in the sky during a period of apparent calm, the reaction is often muted. Why now? Why still? Why bother? Nothing seems to be happening. This is where the discomfort begins, because the aircraft does not behave like something waiting for permission to matter. It does not surge forward only when tensions spike. It does not vanish when the situation cools. Instead, it stays. The flight paths repeat. The schedules persist. The presence does not scale down simply because visible events do. From a distance, this persistence looks inefficient. From a conventional perspective, it looks like overcommitment. If nothing is happening, why maintain continuous presence? Why spend resources, crews, time on an aircraft whose success is defined by the absence of results? These questions rarely receive clear answers because the answers are not designed to be obvious. And that is precisely the point. The RC-135 does not exist to mark moments. It exists to occupy intervals. Most military platforms are understood through events. A strike happens, a sortie is flown, a target is hit. Value is measured at the moment something changes. The rivet joint operates in the opposite direction. Its relevance stretches across time periods where nothing resolves, where no decision is finalized, where no threshold is clearly crossed. In these stretches, nothing appears to be happening, but conditions are quietly accumulating. Tensions remain unresolved, signals remain ambiguous, postures remain deliberately unclear, and in that ambiguity, the system does not relax, it tightens. This is why RC-135 feels out of place to casual observers. It refuses to conform to the idea that activity must announce itself. There is no reveal, no visible payoff, no cinematic moment where its purpose becomes obvious. Instead, its presence becomes most noticeable only when questioned. Why is it still there? Why is it not stood down? Why does it continue to fly when there is nothing to see? Those questions expose a deeper assumption, that calm means absence of pressure, that if the surface looks still, the underlying system must be at rest. The RC-135 flies precisely because that assumption is unreliable. Periods with nothing happening are rarely neutral. They are often periods where decisions are being delayed, positions are being tested indirectly, and limits are being probed without being crossed. These phases are not empty, they are unstable. But instability does not always announce itself with action. Sometimes it presents as prolonged quiet, the kind that makes sustained attention feel excessive. And yet, that is exactly when presence becomes costly to abandon. To the outside world, the RC-135 looks like an aircraft searching for something that never appears. To the system that keeps it flying, the absence of visible events is not reassurance. It is a condition that requires monitoring, not relaxation. The aircraft's value does not come from triggering outcomes, but from refusing to disengage while outcomes remain undecided. This creates a tension that is easy to miss. If nothing has happened, then surely it could have left, but it didn't. And the longer it stays, the harder it becomes to maintain the idea that nothing is going on. At some point, the question quietly flips. It is no longer, what is the RC-135 doing? It becomes, what does it mean that it has not stopped? That question does not lead to a simple explanation. It leads to discomfort, because it suggests that the absence of visible events is not the absence of demand. It suggests that modern systems are structured to treat waiting not as downtime, but as a form of sustained pressure. And that realization does not arrive with a conclusion. It lingers. The RC-135 keeps flying. The skies remain quiet. Nothing resolves. But the system does not stand down. It holds. The longer the RC-135 remains airborne, the more it unsettles a familiar expectation. In most systems, persistence is a response. It follows escalation. It answers a visible shift. But here, persistence precedes anything observable. The aircraft does not wait for confirmation that something matters. It behaves as if the lack of confirmation is itself a reason to stay. That inversion is easy to overlook because nothing dramatic accompanies it. No alerts, no public signals, no obvious reaction. Just a plane that does not leave. From the outside, this kind of presence feels excessive. Human intuition is shaped by moments. We react when lines are crossed. We relax when they are not. Between those moments, attention usually fades. The RC-135 disrupts that rhythm. It treats the space between events not as a pause, but as an interval that still requires occupation. An occupation over time becomes expensive. Not because something happens, but because something might. This creates a subtle imbalance. To observers, the aircraft appears static. To the system supporting it, nothing about the situation is settled. Crews rotate, flights repeat, endurance becomes routine. And routine, in this context, is not comfort, it is commitment. What makes this difficult to grasp is that commitment is being maintained without a visible trigger. There is no single moment you can point to and say, this is why it must stay. Instead, the justification stretches across time. Day after day, the question of withdrawal is quietly deferred. Not because conditions have improved, but because they have not resolved. In older frameworks, this would feel inefficient. Why allocate continuous presence to a space that produces no outcome? Why hold resources in the air when there is no clear task to complete? Those questions assume that value only appears at the moment of action. They assume that until something happens, nothing is being demanded. The RC-135 operates under a different assumption, one that does not announce itself, but quietly governs behavior. As time passes, the meaning of presence begins to shift. What started as still flying becomes not allowed to stop, not because a rule was declared, but because disengagement itself starts to look like a decision. And decisions, in unresolved environments, carry weight. The longer the aircraft remains, the more conspicuous its absence would become. This is where the pressure accumulates, not in the airspace itself, but in the idea of leaving it. When nothing happens, leaving feels safe, until you realize that staying has become the default. At that point, withdrawal is no longer neutral, it is an action. And actions, unlike waiting, draw attention. The RC-135 never announces this shift. It does not signal escalation, it does not mark a transition. It simply keeps flying until the system around it quietly reorganizes. Not around an event, but around sustained presence. This is why the aircraft is so easy to misunderstand. It does not look busy, it does not look decisive, it does not look urgent, and yet it refuses to disengage. That refusal forces a re-evaluation, not of what the aircraft can do, but of what nothing happening actually means. If nothing were truly happening, there would be no cost to stopping. The fact that stopping feels consequential suggests something else is at work, but that something is never named. It is only felt as continued presence in a quiet sky. the RC-135 does not resolve tension. It does not conclude a phase. It does not close a chapter. It simply remains while the system waits without resting. And as long as it stays airborne, the idea that nothing is happening becomes harder to maintain. Eventually, the question stops being technical. It is no longer about what the RC-135 listens to, or how it operates, or what information it collects. Those details fade into the background. What remains is something more unsettling. Why is it still there? The aircraft has not forced a response. It has not triggered a visible change. It has not produced a moment you can point to and explain. And yet, its continued presence begins to reshape expectations. If nothing were happening, this level of persistence would make no sense. If the situation were truly stable, standing down would be easy. The fact that neither occurs quietly erodes the original assumption. At some point, the idea that nothing is happening becomes difficult to defend, not because an event disproves it, but because the system behaves as if the cost of leaving is too high. That behavior does not come from drama or urgency. It comes from sustained attention in the absence of resolution. The RC-135 never declares that a line is close to being crossed. It never confirms that one will be. It simply remains in place while the interval stretches on. And in that interval, the system does not relax. It adjusts. This is the moment where the old intuition fails. The belief that value only appears when something visibly changes can no longer explain the behavior you are seeing. If nothing mattered, presence would be optional. But presence is being maintained as if withdrawal itself would alter the situation. That realization does not arrive as a conclusion. There is no announcement, no definition, no final sentence that resolves the meaning. The aircraft keeps flying, the sky remains quiet, and the system continues to act as though that quiet is not an absence, but a condition that cannot be ignored. The RC-135 does not prove anything. It does not explain itself. It simply stays airborne while nothing seems to happen, and in doing so, makes that nothing feel far less empty than it first appeared.